We begin this hour with our special coverage of the United Nations General Assembly in New York City. The United Nations is celebrating its 80th anniversary as the global community tries to navigate through the challenges of the world. Key items on the agenda include the wars being fought in the Middle East and Ukraine, as well as the serious challenges being posed by climate change. Among the leaders who spoke at the UN's latest session were Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar. While Sergei Lavrov highlighted saying any aggression against Moscow will be met with a decisive response, Lavrov has further denied that Russia has no intention of attacking NATO or EU nations, calling such claims provocations. He has said that threats against Russia are becoming more common and warned Western nations not to underestimate Russia's resolve. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar took the opportunity to slam Pakistan and accuse the wealthy nations of their hypocrisy in global trade and selective responses to crisis. This comes amid strained trade ties between the United States and India, as U.S. imposed heavy tariffs on the country, citing India is buying oil from Russia. To help us understand these developments and more, I'm joined by our correspondent, Thomas Porteous, who is currently in New York City. Thomas, what were the main points India has highlighted at the UNGA today, and how were they received by the international community?
Well, yes, you join us live here from just outside the United Nations General Assembly Hall, where a day wraps up just before it takes its break, before the last day of the conference, where, of course, it's been a hugely eventful week. Today, however, we have seen India take to the stage in front of that hall, that iconic hall here in New York City, where External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar showed and expressed India's path forward and India's views, where he said that once again he reiterated India's stance against terrorism, referencing Pakistan very, very heavily, but did not mention its name once. He said that since India has gained independence in 1947, that it has suffered decades and decades of terrorist activity from what he called the epicenter of terrorism. Of course, he once again stressed that whoever is allies with those who orchestrate and finance terrorism will have it come back to bite them. Of course, he stressed the importance of fighting the climate crisis and also the development and the championing of the global south. And once again, critiqued the United Nations like so many other countries have, and stressed the fact that India needs a seat on that United Nations Security Council. Of course, India, a population of 1.4 billion people and the fourth largest economy in the world, he argued that the United Nations is in fact an outdated organization, and that 2025 does not and the current climate of it does not reflect on the current operations in how the United Nations work. So, of course, a hugely significant day when it came to the External Affairs Minister of India taking to that podium and expressing India's view on the world stage.
And now, how did Russia present its position on global issues, and what implication could this have for international relations?
Well, yes, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov took to the stage today to express the points of view of the Russian Federation. He, of course, spoke about many things, including, of course, his ongoing war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin was not there to express it himself, but he sent his second in command. Sergei Lavrov, a great speaker, And also he slammed the West, called the West the golden billion, and said, why does this organization let the, quote, golden billion, referencing to the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and other Western nations, choose how this organization moves forward, and called for mass reform. He also spoke out against the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but also slammed the October 7 attacks, which Hamas, of course, perpetrated. A huge significant development is that he said that Russia does not have any interest in attacking NATO or any European countries. And so, despite these constant drone incursions, which have had Europeans on their toes over the recent weeks, Russia says that this shouldn't be the case. Russia does not, in fact, have any desire to cause any hostilities with those NATO nations and, of course, other European nations as well. And so, of course, this can be seen as pure rhetoric coming out of the Kremlin. Of course, the United Nations here are huge stage, broadcasted to the entire world. Sergei Lavrov, certainly a very good orator, and came across very, very well when he was speaking. And so we'll see if Russia's actions match their words in the coming weeks.
And Thomas, what priorities did Germany emphasize at the UNGA, and how do these reflect Europe's current stance on global matters?
Yes, of course, German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul took to the stage today, and of course spoke about the threat from the east, which is, of course, Moscow. We've had and seen these constant drone incursions coming into Europe, which has been seen as a huge threat, and have had NATO jets scrambling on a near weekly basis. Of course, and this was followed Sergei Lavrov's speech, and so we'll see how that plays out. However, Germany said it did support a sustainable development goals and innovation, technological progress, and wants the UN to use those tools for all humankind. And so, of course, hints there to multilateralism. Once again, the world working together, and in a ever-divisive world, that seems ever more likely and unlikely. Germany is pushing for an open-ended discussions about UN reform, including the Security Council, which of course it is not on. Germany, one of the most powerful and richest countries in the world, of course lost the Second World War, which is when the United Nations was founded. And so it is also starting its non-permanent role on the Security Council in 2027 to 2028, yet it still does want reform. It wants to see some serious changes here into how representation and how this institution here can be modernized. Germany also, of course, its UNGA presidency has better together as its theme, and so a lot of unifying talk here. We'll see if the United Nations really does reform and reflects the current years and seeks peace and prosperity, as it says on the tin.
And Thomas, were there any major discussions today about the ongoing conflicts, such as Ukraine and the Middle East, and what reactions did they provoke?
Yes, of course. Global conflicts remain rife in 2025. You, of course, have the Gaza humanitarian crisis and the Israel-Hamas war, and of course the Russia and Ukraine war, and of course the ongoing wars in Africa, which are not spoken about in mainstream media as much as they should be. And so, of course, we saw many leaders today speak for peace and say that these wars should be brought to an end. Many people and many countries have a very, very strong view on that of the Gaza war, some calling it a genocide. Of course, we saw Colombia's president today have his US visa revoked after delivering a very strong message yesterday at the United Nations, and actually turned up just here this morning with a megaphone in Palestinian dress, protesting against the Israeli action. So, of course, global conflicts remain front and center of this United Nations Assembly. The Russia-Ukraine war, however, remains more divisive. Of course, Russia is a huge power and has huge oil reserves and spoke very, very well in front of the United Nations today. And of course, many people without taking sides say they wanted peace, and that has been the message throughout. However, the United Nations has come under scrutiny and has said that it cannot do enough. It is no longer a peacemaking body. And of course, we will have to see if serious calls for United Nations reform are processed through and acted upon.
And what broader calls for cooperation, UN reform, or emerging alliances were evident in today's sessions?
Well, yes, of course, as I've just said, United Nations has had multiple criticisms throughout this entire week. It started off with some huge words from President Donald Trump, who said, "What is the point in the United Nations? It doesn't stop any wars." He then claimed to stop 7 himself and say that the United Nations is no longer a peacekeeping body, and then followed President Zelensky, who said that the United Nations also is not doing its job. And we'll see how this crisis and how countries can work together in this world where leaders, some of which seem to be throwing out the rule book of international law, and some, I've been speaking to some people here, they have some real worry for the future of this institution, and give it another 80 years, which is what this event has been marketing for. They're unsure if it is still going to be here, if things continue to go in the direction that they are. So, of course, a hugely broad calls for reform from all sides of the political spectrum. And so, of course, we will be here hopefully next year, and it's been a pleasure covering this entire event here.
Thank you, Thomas Porteous, for giving us that insight from New York. Now we move on to our next news. Russia has launched a